for throwing this together so quickly and for a great cause. So just a quick kind of explanation of what Cofense is. So if you know Fish Me from former years, we originally started in 2007. And 2 years ago, rebranded as Cofense because we started in the phishing simulation security awareness segment, and over the years have evolved to be more phishing defense. And so it just made sense for us to kind of make that name change to transition into something that really speaks more about what we are and what we do. So today I'm going to talk about the phishing threat landscape, because that's where our sweet spot is really specific to phishing threats. So I'm going to talk about the evolution versus revolution, kind of what are we observing at Cofense, and then kind of what are we kind of forecasting for upcoming threats that based on what we're seeing. So evolution versus revolution. So malware these days is typically not revolutionary. Ransomware, keyloggers, information stealers, and other types of malware have been seen throughout history, as we know, but they're in various shapes and flavors. Cyber criminals figure that reusing and repurposing these existing tools with an evolution-centric approach is more efficient than starting from scratch. Leveraging something that they've kind of already are familiar with makes for easier use and helps drive more phishing campaigns without having to deal with maintenance and effort. So as these threat actors mature and become more prolific, their payout becomes greater, demonstrating that improving is better than remaking entirely. And it kind of goes to that whole mentality of the phrase that everyone knows, why reinvent the wheel when it's already working? And so this is a reoccurring theme that we are noting that, throughout this threat landscape and what we've seen throughout over the past year. So Imhotep, so this is a banking Trojan, this very prolific botnet. It presented a serious risk in Q4 of 2019 and then early into 2020, but it took a pause in disseminating phishing campaigns as early as February. As we've seen in the past, these breaks are become very typical of Imhotep operations. Holding true to this evolution versus revolution theme, the malware found a number of minor tweaks to include in the last resurgent that we saw in this last quarter, returning with resulting with major returns on what they're finding and what they're able to extract with that botnet or with their malware. And this botnet has a gigantic amount of phishing emails with malicious attachments, typically in the form of a Word document with macros. The tweaks, however, have included various new targets for reply chain compromises and several themed templates to lure unsuspecting users in. And we've seen these templates range from a Halloween party invite to a Christmas party invite, and even using the climate change advocate Greta Thunberg that became popular in the last part of the year. With more than 19 million unique recipients received in the Imhotep phishing, there's at least 290,000 compromised email accounts that are used to deliver these emails. So this is a massive scale and descent rate of success that gave the threat actors plenty of return that they otherwise on an otherwise established platform. So Imhotep was shown to enable malware as well, like dropping TrickBot or Ursnif, which is infecting machines. In some cases, have even led to ransomware attack, specifically Raikou ransomware. So I'm just going to let this slide build for a second. So as we go into talking about ransomware, I want to have you pay attention to some of these headline themes and see if there's anything particular that you might notice about these these headlines as they flowed in here. There's a couple more, and then these last two actually were pulled just from this week. So these are what we saw through the end of 2019, and then just this week we saw these two the two hits come in. So specifically, what are we seeing? So they are targeting very specific types of organizations. So we saw some cities in there. We saw some municipalities. We saw some healthcare hospitals. And they're also targeting organizations with sensitive data or critical operations. Where we would see law offices, or like we saw in that last one, vaccine testing laboratory. So what they're also doing is they're combining these now with a breach and a ransomware. So they might deliver that ransomware, exfiltrate some data in the background, and then if the ransom is not paid, then they start to drip out some of that information that they have stolen. So just some background on the reason why we're seeing this shift. So in 2015 to 2017, ransomware as a service was kind of established, but it was costly for their infrastructure. Law enforcement was constantly taking down their infrastructure. It was hard for them to evade them. And so they found that if they were more targeted and honed into their infrastructure a bit more, that they were able to get a better ROI and charge for their ransomware. And actually, with this last combination of ransomware and breach releasing of data, they're having a little bit more success, because even if you have backups and you have your data stored offline, and as organizations want to just be able to not pay the ransom and just restore services, there's still the risk of that data, the data breach, because of the data that they're releasing. So organizations are now being forced to have to actually pay that ransomware, even if they're able to reestablish their operations. So the most prevalent malware delivery mechanisms that have held fairly consistent over the last year, the average volume indicates that prevalence of each delivery mechanism and phishing campaigns. What we're seeing is CVE 2017 1182 and 2017 8570 delivering a lot of this of these exploits. The threat actors continue to live off the land, abusing these features and leveraging trusted resources to deliver this malware. Often these features are established to conduct efficient business operations and can simply not just be disabled for organizations without negatively impacting them and their business. We also see trusted file sharing platforms such as OneDrive and Dropbox delivering malware. And if you remember what I talked about in when we talked about Imhotep, that it was using a Word document with a macro enabled. And when we see Imhotep start to ramp back up, then we see a spike in those office macros. So in another representation of this evolution versus revolution theme, publicly available keyloggers and information stealers have been extremely common in phishing campaigns to deliver their malware over the last year. In the last quarter, the 404 keylogger found a foothold in the phishing landscape, ramping up the activity and becoming more popular among threat actors. Typically, malware families such as FormGrabber, Hawkeye, and Agent Tesla have dominated the landscape with little competition, but now we're continuing to see this keylogger take some of that dominance from them. Some of these malware families have anti-analysis mechanisms, geo-checks, and other technical controls to avoid detection and to ensure that they're able to have a successful attack. The 404 keylogger added a few new recent features, going back to that revolution and evolving, like using pastebin to exfiltrate logs from infected machines, enabling a greater degree of anonymity. and low maintenance, thanks to the fact that the threat actors do not need to have an established infrastructure to be able to receive the information. And at the bottom, you can see some of the most common malware families that we're seeing. So what is it that, what are we forecasting to see in this as we continue into this year? So Windows 7 end of life is like to result in new malware and exploits. So Microsoft chose to no longer actively support this operating system, which increases the risk that organizations are faced by not being able to having patches available and to be able to deploy and keep those systems secure. So similar to what we saw with Windows XP in 2014, when that was end of life, threat actors are going to want to leverage some of that same unpatched vulnerabilities to create new malware and exploits, and kind of goes back to what we saw with the 11882. So targeted ransomware, as I kind of talked about in that ransomware slide, we think that will continue to be targeted and increase, as I said, with the coupling of the breach versus the attack and dripping out that exfiltrated data. And they're going to target those sensitive organizations where they have personal data or they have PII that organizations need to protect. And once it's public, then it's then now they're dealing with the data breach at the same time as dealing with this ransom attack. So the fact that they're going to have to pay those ransoms to be able to stop that data leakage from happening. And then lastly, Imhotep. Imhotep has been quiet since early February, but those lulls are not unusual for Imhotep. This threat actor operating this botnet tends to go quiet, make some changes, retool, maybe do a little bit of testing, and then we'll have to see how that retooling behaves as that botnet then starts back up again. And based on what we've seen in the past, and lack of any indication of what the adversary group has been, I'm sorry, based on history and lack of any indication that the adversary group has been arrested, we expect to see Imhotep disseminating phishing campaigns again in the near future. And I think that's all that I have at this point.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We very much appreciate you joining here today. And want to remind people that the breakout sessions are going on right now. So if you haven't checked them out yet, our next one should be starting in just about 8 minutes. As well as a reminder to any new joiners of this Twitch stream to check out the donation page for Nurse's House. We are currently at 22 supporters and just shy of $2,630. So please keep sending people there, share that link and share this link, and we'll connect back up here in just a couple minutes with the next session.